Shintz, citizen of Marathon and member of Citizens for a Responsible Mind. A comment and a question. The gentleman from Superior told us about how there's a group that meets with the industry in his town on a regular basis. Perhaps we can have a group from among us here or from our town who can meet with Stillwater on a regular basis, maybe even every month, and keep things in the open and share ideas back and forth. I hope we can set something like that up. As for my question, we heard from Mr. Chapman about money that's available that persons can access so that they can better participate in the review process. Terry, Michael, are we going to set up some kind of meeting or something on Facebook where we can get a group together, a committee who can talk about what money we want and what we're going to go after?
Well, I think it would be wise to do that, send a message to Facebook to ask those almost 400 people who would like to participate in that. And I also think it would be wise to find out what other people are going to apply for intervenor status, be they going to apply for funding or not. I think that's a separate thing. But you mentioned the Binational Forum is obviously stakeholders, First Nations are obviously stakeholders, and just to get a sense of all the people who are going to apply for intervenor status, and then be smart about what we would do with those finite, even though they're considerable, but finite funds in terms of not repeating research. But also I think a question for me from this group is there any research that you would like to see specifically done that might prevent some of these problems in the future? But get a sense of what everybody's questions are so that we're not all applying for funding and hiring the same experts to do the same work.
Certainly, I'll mention that there's an independent funding review committee that's established by the agency to look at the applications coming in. And one of the things that committee will be looking at is the degree of cooperation amongst individuals or even groups, so that there's a minimization of duplication of what's being requested. We'll be here. Our plans are probably the first week in December to come back and hold an information session that would include speaking about the application process and how that works for the funding program.
It's worth mentioning that you have very strict rules. No group can line their pockets with this. It has to be specifically allocated.
Certainly, I'll mention first, it's not a blank check. In fact, groups don't get, or individuals don't get checks up front. That you expend the funds first, and then you're reimbursed based on how that lines up with your contribution agreements.
Thomas? Claus Oswald with the Binational Forum. My question is, who has standing to make submissions to the review panel?
There's no test for anybody to get intervenor status. So typically what review panel will do, just from an administrative perspective, especially when public hearings are taking place, they'll ask people to pre-register just so they can plan out their day. But the review panel will also allow for walk-in. So if somebody didn't read the ad or didn't know about it but just found out that day, they can come forward. So if anybody wants to write to a review panel in place to say they're American or otherwise, that they have concerns about the project, there's no determination made about geographic location. As long as the issues are valid that they're raising, the panel would consider those.
Okay.
Steve?
Steve, with your PowerPoint, there was a point about panel selection.
Right.
In that, I can't remember the wording exactly. I know
free conflict, unbiased, and have expertise relevant to the project. Yeah.
Has that been? That could be a difficult or more specific criteria, or?
Like I said, what we do is try to line up the project with the expertise we think we'll need. So, generic mining project, typically we want to get somebody with a mining engineering or geology background. Given the proximity to the lake, freshwater ecologist, and maybe somebody that has experience in socioeconomics. So typically, that's what we look for. We have a roster of individuals that have sat on our review panels in the past that we typically like to go through because those individuals are practiced at doing these reviews because there's a lot of administration involved in the review process. We have a very, very thorough check on whether or not there is a potential for conflict of interest there with those individuals. The other thing that we always have too is just finding somebody who's available to put their lives on hold for a period of a year or 2 years. It certainly can be very demanding on them professionally and personally. when they're assigned to a review panel, it pretty much limits them to undertaking any outside work while they're on a review panel.
Yeah, I was just wanting to ask about the documents that are submitted by the proponent of the project.
Right.
And in particular, what are the restrictions, if any, on public review of those documents?
Yeah, so our model process would be that there is public review of the proponent's documents. So the day it's filed with the review panel is typically the day the review panel undertakes a public consultation period on those documents. So there's two things the panel does: public consultation on those documents, and the panel itself is going to start to go through those documents and see whether or not it conforms with the guidelines that were previously issued.
Is there any information that the company can label as proprietary and not available, or redact parts of it and such?
Yeah, there's only two situations where a panel could allow something to be kept confidential, and it's not just from the proponent, it could be any individual or Aboriginal group. If there is harm to the environment that could come about as a result of that information being made public, or if there's harm to the individual. I'll give you a very specific example where we've had projects where there's burial sites that an Aboriginal group did not wish to have made publicly known because of fear over vandalism or access into those sites. The panel considered the request from the Aboriginal group, held an in-camera session with the Aboriginal group to talk about where those burial sites were and what effect the project would have on it, and that was it. So, as I said, harm to the individual, harm to the environment. Harm to the individual, we've never had a situation where somebody has come forward to say, I'm personally afraid for my safety and wish to talk to you about something, but it's something the panel could consider. Everything else is made public.
As a follow-up to that, is that proponent's information available online for people who are not, local and able to?
That's right. Our practice is we have a public registry established for our review panels, and every document that's in the public registry goes online, with the exception of things that you really can't put online very well, say videos and things like that. We just don't have the capacity. But every written document goes online.
Links to a lot of that stuff is already on the Binational Forum site as well, the Superior site.
So we seem to be talking about a lot of dollars involved in the funding for the intervener, as well as the panel and the locations and visits. Who's paying for all this? I'm assuming the proponent is paying for this, a majority of this?
So I'll just go through that. We have something called the cost recovery order. So from the day the review panel is appointed to the day they issue the report, their direct costs associated with undertaking the review are passed on to the proponent via the agency. Outside of those time periods, including participant funding, it's a cost borne by the taxpayer, the federal government.
Okay. I just want to make a comment. I think today we're more environmental stewards than we've ever been in history. All of us in this room are. But I think there's a very much big need in regards to the economic stability of the region as well as the province and the country. So we have to take two and weigh them out. And at some point, there's going to be situations where there might be a small environmental impact, but does it outweigh the economic stability of a community or a region? And that's what we really must consider along the way going forward in any plan, whether it's here in Marathon or anywhere in the province or the country.
Yeah. So I can tell you, as I previously mentioned in my presentation, that report that's filed by the review panel goes to federal cabinet. If the federal cabinet looks at the panel's report and the panel's indicated there's going to be a significant adverse environmental effect, what cabinet needs to do is to see if those effects are justified in the circumstances. That justification involves a cost-benefit analysis. So I can tell you that other than the Prosperity Project that we just assessed in British Columbia, we've had 3 other situations where a review panel has come to a conclusion of significance. That was the Cheviot mine in Alberta. And in that case, cabinet said those effects are justified in the circumstances based on the economic benefits that would come to the community. We also had 2 other situations, one being the Kemess mine in British Columbia and the Whites Point Quarry in Nova Scotia, where the government said the economic benefits weren't there and could not just be justified in the circumstances.